The Mississippi Delta in the spring of 1851 was a place where the earth itself seemed to breathe with malice. The river, swollen with weeks of relentless rain, pressed against its banks like a caged animal testing the bars. The air hung thick and wet, clinging to skin, filling lungs with the taste of rot and river mud. In the fields of the Thornhill plantation, the cotton plants stood in water up to their stalks, their white blooms stained brown with silt. Ezekiel was 32 years old, though he looked older. His hands were scarred from years of labor, his back marked with the raised lines of old lashes that had never fully healed. He had been born on this land, as had his mother before him. He knew every acre of it, the gentle slopes near the main house, the treacherous lowlands near the river, the cypress swamps where the water never truly left. He knew the rhythms of the seasons, the moods of the overseers, the precise amount of defiance that would earn a beating versus the kind that would get a man killed. But knowing a place does not mean loving it, and Ezekiel had learned long ago that survival and submission were not the same thing. Before we go any further into Ezekiel's story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if this is your first time on our channel, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is a story that official history tried to bury, but memory refused to forget. The overseer was a man named Silas Crow, a wiry, sun-scorched Kentuckian with pale eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. Crow had been at Thornhill for 3 years, and in that time he had earned a reputation for cruelty that went beyond the casual violence most overseers practiced. He did not simply punish infractions, he engineered them. He would assign impossible tasks, then mete out consequences when they were not completed. He would separate families, sell children, break promises with a smile that never reached his eyes. Ezekiel had crossed him 2 weeks earlier. It had been a small thing, or so it seemed. Crow had ordered the men to work through a lightning storm, standing in water-filled furrows while the sky cracked open above them. Ezekiel had spoken up, not loudly, not with defiance. He had simply said, "The lightning's coming down in the field. We should go to the barn until it passes." Crow had turned slowly, water streaming down his hat brim. "You giving orders now, Ezekiel?" "No, sir. Just saying what I see." "What you see," Crow had repeated, his voice soft and dangerous, "is what I tell you to see. Now get back to work." The other men had looked at Ezekiel with something between sympathy and warning. They knew what happened to men who spoke up. They had seen it before. But Ezekiel had not moved immediately. He had stood there for just a moment too long, water pooling around his ankles, looking at Crow with eyes that did not quite lower in submission. That moment had cost him. Crow had not struck him then. That was not his way. Instead, he had smiled, that thin, bloodless smile, and said, "I'll remember that, Ezekiel. I'll remember you're a man who thinks he knows better." Since then, Ezekiel's life had become a calculated ordeal. His rations were cut, his tasks were doubled. He was assigned to the worst sections of the field, the places where the mud was deepest and the mosquitoes bred in clouds so thick they darkened the air. And Crow watched him constantly, waiting for him to falter, to complain, to give any excuse for what would come next. Ezekiel said nothing. He worked, he endured, but something in him had changed. It was not hope. Hope was a luxury he could not afford. It was something colder, harder. It was the understanding that there were things worse than death, and that a man who had nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of man. The rain continued, the river rose, and in the overseer's cabin, Silas Crow sat with 2 men, Dawes and Porter, hired hands who worked the plantation's margins, men with reputations for doing the kind of work that needed to be done quietly. They drank whiskey and talked in low voices about the problem of Ezekiel and what needed to be done about a slave who forgot his place. The levee was failing. Everyone knew it, though no one said it aloud in front of Master Thornhill. The earthen barrier that separated the plantation from the river had been built decades ago, reinforced over the years with whatever materials were at hand. logs, stones, packed clay. But the Mississippi was older than any levee, and it remembered every flood that had come before. It was patient. It waited. On the evening of April 23rd, Crow gathered a crew of men to reinforce the weakest section of the levee, a long stretch near the property's northern boundary, where the ground was soft and the water had begun to seep through in muddy rivulets. It was back-breaking work, done in near darkness with only torches for light. The men hauled sandbags, drove stakes, packed mud with their hands until their fingers bled. Ezekiel was among them. So were Dawes and Porter. Dawes was a thick-necked man from Tennessee, with hands like mallets and a face that rarely changed expression. Porter was younger, leaner, with nervous energy that made him talk constantly, a stream of jokes and observations that no one laughed at, but that he continued anyway, as if silence frightened him more than any other thing. They worked alongside Ezekiel for 2 hours, saying little, their movements synchronized in the way that hard labor demands. The rain had paused, but the sky remained low and threatening, pressing down on them like a hand. The river beyond the levee made sounds that were almost alive, groaning, hissing, the wet slap of current against mud. Crow stood apart, watching. His face was unreadable in the torchlight, but his presence was a weight on every man there. He called out orders occasionally, adjusting the work, redirecting effort, but mostly he just watched Ezekiel. It was near midnight when he gave the order. "Ezekiel," Crow called. "There's a section downstream that's coming apart. Take Dawes and Porter. Bring more sandbags." Ezekiel straightened, his back screaming in protest. He looked at Crow, then at the two men. Something in Dawes's eyes, a flatness, an absence, made Ezekiel's instincts flare, but there was no choice. You did not refuse an order. You did not question. You went. They walked in single file along the top of the levee, their boots slipping in the mud. The torches cast wild shadows, the river on one side, the plantation on the other. The sandbags were heavy, cutting into Ezekiel's shoulders. Behind him, he could hear Porter's breathing, quick and shallow. Dawes was silent. The section Crow had mentioned was real enough, a place where the levee had begun to sag, where water seeped through in dark veins. They worked for perhaps 20 minutes, shoring it up, packing the gaps. Ezekiel's hands moved automatically, his mind elsewhere. He was thinking about his wife Naomi, who had been sold south 3 years ago. He was thinking about the scar on his back that still ached when the weather changed. He was thinking about Crow's smile. He did not hear Dawes move until it was too late. The blow came from behind, something heavy and blunt across the back of his skull. The world tilted, went bright, then dark at the edges. Ezekiel staggered forward, his hands reaching out for something to hold, finding nothing but air. He felt himself falling, heard Porter's voice, high and strained, saying something he could not make out. Then the water took him. The Mississippi was cold and impossibly strong. It pulled him down, spun him, filled his mouth and nose with silt. He could not tell which way was up. His hands struck something solid, a submerged log, a piece of the levee that had broken away, and he grabbed it instinctively, clinging to it even as the current tried to tear him loose. Above the water he heard voices, muffled, distant. "Hold him! Just let the river take him! Make sure—" Something heavy crashed down on top of him. A beam, a section of timber from the levee reinforcement. It pinned him against the log, driving him deeper. Water closed over his head. He thrashed, fought, his lungs burning, his vision going dark. The last thing he heard was Dawes's voice, flat and final. "He's gone!" The last thing he felt was the river, taking him into itself, pulling him down into the cold and the dark where drowned men go. And then there was nothing. They found his hat floating near the broken levee the next morning. Just the hat, waterlogged and torn, caught in the branches of a willow tree that leaned out over the water. Crow stood looking at it for a long time, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Damn shame," he said finally. Good worker when he kept his mouth shut. Dawes and Porter stood beside him, saying nothing. Porter's hands were shaking slightly, though whether from cold or something else was hard to say. Dawes just stared at the water, his face blank. "You two saw what happened?" Crow asked. "He slipped," Dawes said. "Levee gave way under him, went into the water before we could grab him." "River took him," Porter added, his voice too loud. "Current strong. He never came up." Crow nodded slowly. "That's what you'll tell anyone who asks. Accident, the levee, the flood. These things happen." "Yes, sir," they said in unison. Master Thornhill was informed that afternoon. He accepted the news with the mild irritation of a man who has lost a valuable tool. "Mark him down as drowned," he told his clerk. "Deduct the value from this quarter's accounts, and tell Crow to be more careful. I can't afford to lose men to carelessness." In the quarters, the news spread like smoke. Ezekiel was dead. The river had taken him. His body would likely never be found. The Mississippi did not give up her dead easily. Some of the older women began to keen, the low, wordless sound of grief that had crossed an ocean and survived generations. Others simply nodded, as if they had expected this, as if death was just another crop to be harvested. But there was one man, an ancient field hand named Tobias, who had been at Thornhill longer than anyone could remember, who said something strange. "River don't always keep what it takes," he muttered, sitting by the fire in the quarters that first night. "Sometimes it gives things back, change things, things that don't forget." The younger men laughed nervously, told him he was talking foolishness. But Tobias just shook his head and stared into the flames, seeing something the rest of them could not. The rain returned that night, not the steady drizzle of before, but a violent downpour that turned the world into water. The levee held, barely. In his cabin, Crow drank whiskey and told himself that what had been done was necessary, that a man had to maintain order, that some slaves needed to be made examples of. He did not sleep well. The second day was worse. The rain continued. The river rose another 2 feet. Parts of the plantation were now under water. Not just the fields, but some of the outbuildings, the tool sheds, the lower quarters. People moved to higher ground, carrying what they could. Master Thornhill stood on the porch of the main house, watching his property slowly sink beneath brown water, his face tight with fury and helplessness. Crow organized work crews to build new barriers, to dig drainage channels, to do anything that might hold back the flood. Dawes and Porter worked among them, and if they seemed quieter than usual, more prone to glancing over their shoulders at the swollen river, no one remarked on it. That night, Porter woke screaming. He said he had dreamed of hands, cold, waterlogged hands, pulling him down into dark water. Dawes told him to shut up and go back to sleep. But Dawes himself lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. On the third day, the rain finally stopped. The clouds broke apart, and pale sunlight fell across the flooded landscape like a blessing. The water had begun to recede, slowly, leaving behind a crust of mud and debris. Dead fish lay in the fields. Snakes sought high ground. The air smelled like decay. It was mid-afternoon when Joshua, a young field hand, came running up from the south fields, his eyes wide, his breath coming in gasps. "Mr. Crow!" he shouted. "Mr. Crow, you got to come. There's someone down by the break." "What are you talking about, boy?" Crow demanded. "A man," Joshua said, "down by the swamp, just standing there in the water. I saw him. I swear I saw him." "Nah, you saw a man standing in a swamp? That's what's got you running like the devil's after you?" "It was Ezekiel," Joshua whispered. The words hung in the air. Crow's face went very still. Dawes and Porter, who had been working nearby, stopped and turned slowly. "That's impossible," Crow said finally. "Ezekiel drowned 3 days ago. His body's in the river, if it hasn't washed out to the Gulf by now." "I know what I saw," Joshua insisted. "It was him, soaked through, covered in mud. But it was him. He was just standing there looking toward the plantation, looking at us." Crow's jaw tightened. "Show me." They went down to the break. Crow, Dawes, Porter and Joshua, along with 3 other men who had heard the commotion and were curious despite their better judgment. The break was a marshy area at the southern edge of the property, where the swamp and the river merged into a maze of cypress trees and black water. It was a place people avoided. Things got lost in the break. Things disappeared. They reached the spot where Joshua had seen the figure. There was nothing there, just water, trees, the soft hiss of settling mud. Joshua looked around frantically, pointing. He was right there, standing in the water, right there. "You saw a cypress stump," Crow said flatly. "Or a heron. You let your imagination run away with you. It wasn't no stump. It was him." Crow stepped close to Joshua, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Listen to me. Ezekiel is dead. You understand? Dead. What you saw was nothing. And if I hear you spreading stories that scare the other hands, I'll have you whipped until you can't sit for a week. Are we clear?" Joshua nodded, terrified. But as they turned to leave, Porter looked back at the break one last time. And for just a moment, so brief he might have imagined it, he thought he saw something in the shadows between the trees. A shape, a figure, standing perfectly still, watching them go. He did not mention it, but that night he dreamed of drowning. The days that followed were unnaturally quiet. The floodwaters continued to recede, revealing a landscape transformed. Fields scoured down to bare clay, fences torn away, a dead mule lying bloated near the creek. The work of recovery began, slow and exhausting. Men and women labored to clear debris, salvage what could be saved, plant new seed in ground that might or might not support life. But beneath the surface rhythm of work, something had changed. People felt it even if they could not name it. There was a watchfulness in the air, a sense of being observed. Workers would pause in the fields, looking up suddenly as if they had heard their name called, but there would be no one there. Just the wind. Just the empty sky. More sightings came. Old Ruth, who brought water to the field hands, swore she saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line at dusk, tall, motionless, draped in what looked like wet rags. When she blinked, it was gone. 2 children playing near the quarters ran back crying, saying they had seen a man standing in the pig pen, covered in river mud, saying nothing, just watching them with eyes that didn't move. A field hand named Marcus claimed he had been working late, repairing a fence, when he heard footsteps behind him. He had turned, and there, not 20 feet away, was Ezekiel, or something that had been Ezekiel. The man was soaked, his clothes torn and stained with algae and black water. His skin had a grey cast to it, like meat that had been under water too long. But it was the eyes that Marcus could not forget. They were focused, intent, burning with something that was not quite human. Marcus had run. He did not stop until he reached the quarters, where he sat by the fire shaking, and would not speak of what he had seen until the next morning. Crow heard the stories. He dismissed them publicly, threatened punishment for anyone caught spreading superstitious nonsense. But privately, he was uneasy. He found himself checking the shadows, turning at sounds that were not there. He kept his rifle close at night. Dawes and Porter were worse. Porter had developed a twitch, his eyes darting constantly to windows, to doors, to any place something might appear. He drank heavily, slept little, jumped at sudden noises. Dawes was quieter, but his silence had weight to it. He worked mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. At night, he sat on the porch of the cabin he shared with Porter, staring out at the dark landscape, a pistol in his lap. "It's just stories," Porter said one night, his voice slurred with whiskey. "People getting worked up over nothing. That boy saw a damn tree stump, and everyone else is just copying him." "Maybe," Dawes said, but he did not sound convinced. "He's dead, Dawes. You know he's dead. We made sure of it." "I know." "Then what are you worried about?" Dawes was quiet for a long time. "Then you ever hear the old ones talk? About how some people don't stay dead? How if a man dies with unfinished business, with rage still in him, sometimes he finds a way back? That's slave talk, superstition." "Maybe," Dawes said again, "but 3 days, Porter, that's what they say. 3 days in the ground or the water or wherever they go. And then some of them come back, changed, looking for what was taken from them." Porter laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You're drunk." "Not drunk enough," Dawes said. "The next night it happened. Porter had gone to check on the horses in the barn, a routine task done 100 times before. He carried a lantern, its light pushing weakly against the darkness. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of the animals. He moved down the row of stalls, checking water, adjusting feed. He was near the back of the barn when he heard it. A sound, wet footsteps on the wooden floor, slow, deliberate, coming from behind him. He turned. Ezekiel stood 10 feet away. He was exactly as Marcus had described, soaked, covered in river mud and strands of algae. His clothes hung in tatters. His skin had a corpse-grey pallor, but he was upright, moving, and his eyes were fixed on Porter with an intensity that made Porter's bladder threaten to let go. "Jesus Christ," Porter whispered. Ezekiel said nothing. He took a step forward. Water dripped from him, pooling on the floor. The smell that came off him was overpowering. River rot, decay, the deep stink of the swamp. Porter stumbled backward, his lantern swinging wildly. "You're dead. You're supposed to be dead." Ezekiel took another step. His mouth opened slightly, and Porter saw that his teeth were stained brown with silt. When he finally spoke, his voice was like stones grinding together, rough and barely human. "Not dead," Ezekiel said. "Not yet." Porter ran. He dropped the lantern, plunging the barn into darkness, and bolted for the door. Behind him, he heard those footsteps, slow, unhurried, but somehow keeping pace. He burst out of the barn and into the night, screaming for Dawes, for Crow, for anyone. By the time the others arrived, the barn was empty except for the spilled lantern and the horses, which were wild-eyed and restless. There were wet footprints leading in from the back door, footprints that ended in the middle of the floor, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. Porter was incoherent, babbling about Ezekiel, about the dead returning, about eyes that looked through him instead of at him. Crow slapped him across the face hard. "Get hold of yourself." "He's real," Porter gasped. "He's back. I saw him. He spoke to me." Crow looked at Dawes. Dawes looked back. Neither man said what they were thinking. But in that moment a decision was made, an admission, unspoken but understood. They had created something, and now it was coming for them. Crow called a meeting that night, just him, Dawes, and Porter, in his cabin with the door barred and the windows shuttered. A single candle burned on the table between them, casting their faces in harsh shadow. The air was thick with tension and the smell of sweat and fear. "We need to handle this," Crow said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. "Whatever is happening, we need to end it." "How do you end something that's already dead?" Porter demanded. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn. He had not slept in 2 days. "He's not dead," Dawes said quietly. "That's the problem." "We killed him," Porter snapped. "We held him under. We buried him in mud and timber. The river took him. And 3 days later, he walked out of it," Dawes replied. "You saw him. I believe you." "Which means we didn't finish the job." Crow leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Or he never died in the first place. Maybe he got loose somehow. Maybe he's been hiding in the break, and now he's trying to scare us." "You think a man could survive 3 days trapped underwater?" Dawes asked. "I think it's more likely than the alternative." "What alternative?" Porter asked, though he clearly did not want to hear the answer. "That we're being haunted," Dawes said flatly. "That we killed a man who had the will to come back." The word hung in the air, haunted. None of them wanted to say it aloud, but there it was. Porter laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "This is insane. We're sitting here talking about ghosts like we're children." "Then explain the footprints," Dawes said. "Explain how they just stopped in the middle of the barn floor. Explain what Joshua saw, what Ruth saw, what Marcus saw." "Mass hysteria," Crow said, but even he did not sound convinced. "We need to leave," Porter said suddenly. "Just get out, go north. Crow, you can find work anywhere. Dawes and me, we can disappear. Why are we staying here?" "Because running makes us look guilty," Crow said. "We are guilty," Porter shouted. Crow stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "Keep your damn voice down." He paced to the window, peered out through a gap in the shutters. The night outside was utterly black. "Listen to me. If we run, people will ask questions. Master Thornhill will ask questions, and when they start looking for answers, they'll find them. Better to stay. Better to face this head-on." "Face what?" Porter asked. "How do you face something like that?" Crow turned back to them, his face hard. "The same way you face anything. You find it, and you kill it for real this time." "And if we can't?" Dawes asked. Crow's smile was cold. "Then we die. But I'd rather die fighting than run like a coward." They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Dawes nodded. Porter looked like he might vomit, but he nodded too. "Tomorrow night," Crow said, "we go out to the break. We find him. We end this." And the next day was a Sunday, a day of rest. Though there was little rest to be had, the plantation was quiet. A preacher came from the main house to hold services for the slaves in the quarters, reading from a Bible and speaking about obedience and patience and the rewards that awaited the faithful in the next life. The words rang hollow in that place, but people listened because that was what was expected. Ezekiel was not mentioned. But in the afternoon, something happened that made it impossible to ignore him any longer. A group of children had been playing near the creek, a small, muddy stream that ran through the northern section of the property. They were splashing, throwing stones, doing what children do when they are briefly free of supervision. One of them, a girl named Ada, perhaps 6 years old, waded out into the water chasing a frog. She stopped suddenly, her eyes going wide. "Mama," she called. "Mama, there's a man in the water." The other children looked. The adults who were nearby came running. And there, standing in the middle of the creek where the water was only knee-deep, was Ezekiel. He was clearer in the daylight. The grey pallor of his skin was more pronounced, the algae in his hair more visible. His clothes were shredded, barely hanging on his frame. But he was undeniably there, solid, real. He was not translucent or ghostly. He was a man, or something that had once been a man. He stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the main house in the distance. He did not acknowledge the people gathering on the bank. He did not move. He simply stood, as if waiting. Ada's mother grabbed her, pulled her back from the water. The other children were ushered away. The adults stood at a distance, murmuring, afraid to approach, but unable to look away. Someone ran to get Crow. By the time Crow arrived, perhaps 30 people had gathered. They stood in a loose half-circle, watching the figure in the creek. Crow pushed through them, his rifle in hand, his face pale but set. He stopped at the water's edge, staring at Ezekiel. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Crow raised his rifle, leveling it at Ezekiel's chest. "You need to leave," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "This is your one warning. Leave now or I put a bullet in you." Ezekiel's head turned slowly. His eyes met Crow's, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the water, clear and cold. "You already did," Ezekiel said. "Didn't stop me." Crow's finger tightened on the trigger, but he did not fire. Something in those eyes, something vast and patient and utterly without mercy, made him hesitate. Ezekiel took a step forward, water sluicing off him. "You, Dawes and Porter, you held me down. You drowned me. You thought the river would hide what you did. You were causing trouble," Crow said, his voice shaking now. "You needed to be taught a lesson." "I learned," Ezekiel said. "I learned what you are, what you'll always be. Men who kill because they can, because it's easy, because no one will stop you." "I'll stop you," Crow said. He fired. The shot was deafening in the quiet afternoon. The bullet struck Ezekiel square in the chest. His body jerked backward, and for a moment it seemed like he would fall. But he didn't. He straightened slowly, looking down at the hole in his chest. Water and something darker seeped from it. He looked back up at Crow, and his expression had not changed. "Already dead," Ezekiel said softly. "You can't kill me twice." Then he turned and walked deeper into the creek. The water rose to his waist, his chest, his neck, and then he was gone, sliding beneath the surface like a stone, leaving only ripples that slowly flattened and disappeared. The crowd stood in shocked silence. Crow lowered his rifle, his hands shaking violently. Behind him, someone was praying. Someone else was crying. Dawes and Porter, who had arrived just in time to witness the shooting, looked at each other. Porter's face was ashen. Dawes's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might shatter. "Tonight," Crow said quietly, not looking at them. "We end this tonight." Night came with a weight to it, pressing down on the plantation like a hand. There was no moon, no stars. The clouds had returned, low and heavy, and with them a fine mist that blurred the edges of things. The air tasted like rain and rot. Crow, Dawes, and Porter met at the edge of the break just after midnight. Each man carried a weapon, Crow his rifle, Dawes a shotgun, Porter a pistol, and a hatchet. They had also brought torches, though the light they provided seemed thin and ineffective against the darkness. "We stick together," Crow said. "No one goes off alone. We find him, we put him down for good, and we're done with this." "How do you kill something that's already dead?" Porter asked for the second time in as many days. "We'll figure it out," Crow said. But he did not sound confident. They entered the break. The swamp was a different world at night. The water was black and still, reflecting nothing. The cypress trees rose like columns in a ruined cathedral, their Spanish moss hanging in tattered curtains. Things moved in the water, ripples without source, shapes that slid beneath the surface and vanished. The air was thick with the sounds of frogs and insects, a pulsing chorus that seemed to grow louder the deeper they went. They moved slowly, their boots sucking in the mud, their torches casting wild shadows. Every sound made them flinch. Every movement in the water made them freeze. The break seemed endless, a maze of channels and hammocks and dead-end pools. It was easy to get lost here, easy to wander in circles until exhaustion and the water took you. "This was a mistake," Porter muttered. "We should have left. We should have run." "Shut up," Dawes said. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Porter stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" The others listened. At first, there was nothing but the usual swamp sounds. But then, beneath them, something else. A sound, like breathing, slow, rhythmic, coming from all around them. "It's just the wind," Crow said. "There is no wind," Dawes replied. The breathing grew louder. And with it came a smell. The smell of deep water, of things that lived in the dark, of decay. The torches flickered, their flames bending toward the ground as if pressed by invisible hands. Then the footsteps began, slow, deliberate, wet, coming from behind them. They turned as one, raising their weapons. The torchlight pushed weakly into the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and water and mist. But the footsteps continued, getting closer. "Show yourself!" Crow shouted. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, from the darkness just beyond their light, a voice. "You came looking for me." Ezekiel stepped into the torchlight. He looked worse than before. The water had leached something essential from him, leaving him more corpse than man. His eyes were sunken, ringed with shadow. His lips were cracked and stained, but he moved with purpose, with a terrible vitality that had nothing to do with life as the living understood it. Crow fired without warning. The bullet passed through Ezekiel's shoulder, tearing a hole that wept dark water but did not bleed. Ezekiel did not flinch. Dawes fired his shotgun. The blast caught Ezekiel in the chest, staggering him, tearing his shirt to ribbons. But he stayed on his feet. "It doesn't work," Porter said, his voice high and desperate. "Shooting him doesn't work." Ezekiel took a step forward. "You can't kill what the river made," he said. "You can only pay for what you did." He moved faster than any of them expected. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next he was on Porter, his hand closing around the man's throat. Porter screamed, striking at Ezekiel with his hatchet, the blade biting into dead flesh. But Ezekiel did not let go. Dawes and Crow rushed forward, grabbing Ezekiel, trying to pull him off. It was like trying to move a tree. Ezekiel's grip did not weaken. Porter's screams became gurgles, his face going purple, his eyes bulging. "Stop!" Crow shouted. "God damn you, stop!" Ezekiel turned his head, looking at Crow. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. "Why?" he asked. "Did you stop when I begged? Did you listen when I said I couldn't breathe?" Porter went limp. Ezekiel released him, and he fell into the shallow water, gasping, alive but broken. Ezekiel straightened, looking at the three of them. "One," he said softly. "Two more to go." Then he stepped backward into the darkness and was gone. They stood in the torchlight, breathing hard, their weapons useless in their hands. Porter lay in the water, sobbing. Dawes's face was bloodless. Crow's rifle hung at his side, forgotten. "We need to run," Dawes said. "Now, before he comes back." They ran. They made it back to the plantation just before dawn, soaked and exhausted and terrified. Porter could barely walk, his throat bruised black where Ezekiel's fingers had been. Dawes and Crow half carried him to the cabin they shared, locked the door, and collapsed. For a long time, none of them spoke. They simply sat, breathing, trying to process what had happened. The logical part of their minds kept insisting it was impossible. The rest of them knew better. "We can't stay here," Porter rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "He's going to kill us. You saw what he did. Bullets don't stop him. Nothing stops him." "Where are we going to go?" Dawes asked. "You think we can outrun something like that? He'll follow. He'll find us. Doesn't matter where we go." "Then what do we do?" Porter demanded. Crow was silent. He sat by the window, staring out at the grey pre-dawn light. His mind was racing, searching for options, for escape routes, for anything that might save them. But he kept coming back to the same conclusion. They were trapped. They had created this. And now they would answer for it. "We could go to Master Thornhill," Dawes suggested. "Tell him what's happening, get help." "And say what?" Crow asked without turning. "That we murdered one of his slaves and now the corpse is hunting us? You think he'll help? He'll hang us himself to avoid scandal." "Maybe that's better than this," Porter said. Crow turned to look at him. "You want to hang?" "I want this to end," Porter said. "One way or another." The sun rose, bringing with it a day that felt surreal in its normalcy. People went to work in the fields. Children played. The plantation continued its routines as if nothing had changed. But in the cabin, the three men sat in silence, waiting. Ezekiel did not appear during the day, but his presence was felt. People reported seeing him at a distance, standing at the edge of the fields, motionless among the trees, watching, always watching. When anyone approached, he would vanish, slipping away like smoke. The slaves knew what was happening. They did not speak of it openly, but they knew. Some were frightened, but others, particularly the older ones, had a different expression, something that looked almost like satisfaction. They had seen men like Crow before. They had watched justice denied so many times that they had stopped expecting it, but here it was, walking out of the river, delivering itself. By evening, the tension on the plantation had become unbearable. Master Thornhill, sensing something was wrong but unable to pinpoint what, confined himself to the main house. Crow, Dawes, and Porter remained in their cabin, armed and waiting. Night fell. It came for Dawes first. He had gone outside to relieve himself, stepping just beyond the cabin door. The others heard him curse, heard the sound of a struggle. By the time they reached the door, Dawes was gone. There were drag marks in the mud, leading toward the creek. They followed, their weapons raised, their hearts hammering. The drag marks led to the water's edge, then into it. The creek was swollen from recent rains, moving fast and dark. Dawes was standing in the middle of it, water up to his waist. Ezekiel was behind him, one hand on Dawes's shoulder, holding him in place. "Let him go," Crow shouted. Ezekiel looked at them calmly. "Why? You didn't let me go. You held me under until my lungs filled, until I stopped fighting. You watched me die." "That was different," Crow said, though he could not say how. "No," Ezekiel said. "It wasn't." He pushed Dawes under. Dawes fought, thrashing, his hands breaking the surface, grasping at nothing. Crow and Porter rushed forward, splashing into the creek. But by the time they reached the spot, Ezekiel was gone, and Dawes was floating face down in the current. They pulled him out. Porter tried to breathe life back into him, pounding on his chest, forcing air into his mouth. But Dawes did not respond. His eyes stared sightlessly at the sky, his mouth full of water. Porter sat back, covered in creek mud and his friend's spit, and began to laugh. It was a horrible sound, high and cracked and full of despair. Crow stood, water streaming from his clothes, staring at Dawes's body. His mind had gone numb. He could not feel fear anymore, could not feel anything. He had crossed some threshold where emotions stopped meaning anything. "He's coming for us," Porter said through his laughter. "Tonight, tomorrow, doesn't matter. He's going to come, and we can't stop him." "I know," Crow said. "What do we do?" Crow looked at him, and in that moment Porter saw something that frightened him more than Ezekiel ever had. He saw acceptance, resolution. "We finish it," Crow said. They left Dawes's body by the creek. There was no point in moving it, no point in pretending anymore. Everyone on the plantation knew what was happening. Everyone could feel it. Crow and Porter returned to the cabin. They did not speak. They simply sat, weapons in hand, waiting for the inevitable. It came just after midnight. The door opened slowly, though neither of them had heard footsteps. Ezekiel stood in the doorway, framed by darkness. Water dripped from him, pooling on the floor. His eyes reflected the lamplight, giving them an eerie glow. "Your turn," he said. Porter raised his pistol and fired. The bullet caught Ezekiel in the face, snapping his head back, but he did not fall. He straightened slowly, the hole in his cheek revealing the broken teeth beneath. He took a step into the room. "I'll make you a deal," Crow said suddenly. Ezekiel paused. "Let Porter go. This was my idea. I gave the order. He just followed. Let him go, and you can do whatever you want with me." Porter looked at Crow in shock. Ezekiel tilted his head, considering. "You think mercy is possible?" Ezekiel asked. "After what you did?" "I'm not asking for mercy," Crow said. "I'm asking for justice. I'm guilty. He's guilty too, but not like me. Let him carry the weight of what we did. Let him live with it." Ezekiel was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Porter. "Go," he said. Porter did not move. "Go," Crow shouted, "before he changes his mind." Porter stumbled to his feet. He moved toward the door, his eyes on Ezekiel, waiting for the trap. But Ezekiel stepped aside, letting him pass. Porter ran into the night, his footsteps fading into the distance. Ezekiel turned back to Crow. "Noble," he said, "but it changes nothing." "I know," Crow said. He set his rifle down. "I'm not going to fight you." "Why not?" "Because I'm tired," Crow said simply. "And because you're right. What we did was wrong. I knew it then, I know it now, and I can't undo it." Ezekiel moved closer. "You think admission changes what comes next?" "No," Crow said, "but it's true anyway." They stood facing each other in the small cabin, the lamp flickering between them. Two men, one living, one not, connected by violence and the consequences of choice. "I had a wife," Ezekiel said suddenly. "Naomi. They sold her south 3 years ago. I never saw her again. You know what that's like? To have someone taken from you and know you'll never get them back?" "No," Crow said. "You know what it's like to work until your hands bleed, until your back breaks, until you can't remember what it feels like to be your own man?" "No. You know what it's like to be treated like you're less than human, like your property, a thing to be used and discarded." "No," Crow said again, his voice barely a whisper. "Then you don't know anything," Ezekiel said. "You lived your whole life without understanding what you were part of, what you helped maintain." "You're right," Crow said. "I don't understand. I never did. And now it's too late." Ezekiel reached out, his cold hand closing around Crow's throat. Crow did not resist. He looked into Ezekiel's eyes and saw something there that was beyond rage, beyond vengeance. He saw a bottomless grief, a loss so profound it had become something else entirely, something that could not be satisfied, only expressed. "I'm sorry," Crow said. It was inadequate, meaningless, but it was all he had. Ezekiel's grip tightened. "So am I," he said. Letty said they found Crow the next morning, sitting in his chair in the cabin, his eyes open, his face peaceful. There were bruises on his throat. There was water in his lungs. The doctor said it was impossible. There was no water in the room, no way he could have drowned sitting in a chair, but there it was, porter was found 3 days later, hanging from a tree at the edge of the break. The official determination was suicide. But those who cut him down said his clothes were soaked, his lungs full of water, just like crows. The plantation changed after that. It was subtle at first, a shift in atmosphere, a change in the way people moved through the space. But it was real. Master Thornhill sold the property within a year. He said it was for financial reasons, but those who knew him said he could not stand to be there anymore. He had nightmares, they said. He saw things in the water. The new owner was a man from Virginia, pragmatic and modern in his thinking. He did not believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in labor and profit. But he found that his slaves worked with a new awareness, a new sense of boundaries. They did not rebel. Rebellion was impossible, but they moved through the world differently, with a knowledge that had not been there before. Word of what happened spread through the underground networks that connected plantations across the South. The story of Ezekiel, the man who had drowned and returned, became a legend. Details were embellished, changed, adapted to fit different contexts, but the core remained. Sometimes the dead do not rest. Sometimes they come back to claim what was taken from them. In the quarters, the old people told the story to the young. They did it quietly, carefully, knowing that some stories were dangerous to tell, but more dangerous to forget. They spoke of justice delayed, but not denied. They spoke of the river and what it gives back. Remember, they would say, that every action has weight, that cruelty leaves marks that don't wash away, that there are debts that must be paid, one way or another. The break remained. No one went there if they could avoid it. Even after the war, even after emancipation, even after the plantation was broken up and sold off in pieces, the break remained. People said you could still see him sometimes, on foggy nights, standing in the water. Just standing, watching, waiting. Whether it was true or not did not matter. The story was true, and sometimes that was enough. 70 years later, an old man named Solomon sat on the porch of his house in Chicago. He was 93, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his eyes clouded with age. His grandchildren sat at his feet, listening to him talk about the old days, about the South, about the plantation where he had been born. "My mama told me a story," he said, his voice thin but clear, "about a man named Ezekiel. This was before I was born, but she remembered. Everyone remembered." The children leaned in, sensing something important. He was a slave, like my mama, like her mama before her, and he was killed by evil men, drowned in the river during a flood, but 3 days later he came back, not as a man exactly, but not as a ghost either. Something else, something the river made. "What did he do?" one of the children asked. "He made things right," Solomon said. "In the only way he could. He found the men who killed him, and he took from them what they took from him. His life, his dignity, his chance to be free." "Did he die again?" another child asked. Solomon was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street, at the cars and the buildings, at a world that would have been unimaginable to the people in his story. "I don't think so," he said finally. "I think some part of him is still there, in that river, in that break, watching, remembering, making sure that what happened to him doesn't get forgotten." "But that was a long time ago," the child said. "It's different now." Solomon smiled sadly. "Different, yes, but the same too. The world still has its evil men, still has people who think they can hurt others without consequence. And maybe, just maybe, there are still things in the water, watching, waiting for the scales to balance." The children were quiet, digesting this. Solomon reached out and touched the nearest one's head gently. "The point isn't whether Ezekiel's ghost is real," he said. "The point is that justice is real, that every action has a consequence, that you can't build a life on the suffering of others and expect it to last. Sooner or later the water rises. Sooner or later what you tried to drown comes back." He paused, his eyes distant. "And when it does, there's no running, there's no hiding, there's only the reckoning." I'll tell you the story of Ezekiel, passed into history, into folklore, into the collective memory of a people who carried their stories like precious cargo across generations. It was told in different ways, in different places, with different details, but it was always told because some stories need to be told. Not because they're comforting, but because they're true. Not true in the sense of provable facts, but true in the sense that they capture something essential about the human experience, about cruelty and consequence, about power and justice, about the debts we accumulate and the ways they are paid. The Mississippi River still flows. The swamps and breaks of the Delta still hold their secrets. And on certain nights, when the fog rolls in and the water rises, people say you can still see him. A figure standing in the shallows, watching, waiting. Ezekiel of Mississippi, the man who drowned and returned, the reminder that some debts cannot be forgiven, only settled, the proof that even in the darkest times, even in the most brutal systems, justice finds a way. Not always the justice we want, not always the justice we expect, but justice nonetheless, and the water remembers everything.